The personnel clerk barely glanced up from her computer screen as Captain Sarah Chun slid her orders across the counter. Fort Carson's administration building hummed with the familiar sounds of a Tuesday morning. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, boots squeaking against polished floors. Chun stood at attention, her service uniform crisp despite the early flight from Virginia. The clerk's eyes widened slightly as she scrolled through Chen's digital file. "Your record has some gaps here," she said, tapping the screen. "These years show training assignments, but no duty stations." "Classified rotations," Chen replied evenly. "Standard for certain specialties." The clerk nodded without further questions and printed her building access badge. "Welcome to 4th Aviation Battalion, Captain. Squadron Ready Room is in Building 2847. Commander wants all new arrivals to check in before end of day." Chun crossed the quad toward the aviation complex, her boots crunching on gravel still damp from morning rain. The Rocky Mountains rose sharp against the western sky, their peaks dusted with September snow. Colorado stretched out in every direction, vast and open, so different from the tight valleys where she'd spent the last 3 years. The ready room door swung open easily. Inside, a dozen pilots clustered around a large screen monitor displaying weather patterns. They turned as Chun entered, conversations trailing off. She recognized the moment of assessment that always came with being the new person, amplified by being female in a room of men. "Captain Sarah Chun reporting," she announced. "Just assigned to Alpha Company." A few pilots nodded. One extended his hand and introduced himself as Warrant Officer 3rd Class Danny Kim. Before the conversation could develop, the side door banged open and a major strode through. He was compact and muscular, his flight suit tailored tight across his chest, his hair styled with more product than regulation typically allowed. Well, he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Fresh meat. Let me guess. You're here to fly our Chinooks?" "Yes, sir," Chun replied. "Captain Chun, I have 1,800 hours rotary wing, for 100 in Chinook specifically." The major laughed, a sharp bark that made several pilots glance away. 1,800 hours. That's adorable. He stepped closer, circling Chun like a boxing referee examining fighters before a match. "You know what a Chinook weighs, Cupcake? 50,000 pounds loaded. That's a lot of aircraft for someone your size." Chun kept her expression neutral. "I'm qualified and current in type, sir. My flight physical shows no restrictions." "Oh, I'm sure you passed all the tests," the major continued. His nameplate read Brennan. "I'm sure you checked all the boxes. But flying in combat and flying around Fort Carson are different things." He turned to address the room. "Gentlemen, this is our new pilot. Let's see if Cupcake here can keep up with the big boys." Several pilots shifted uncomfortably. Kim looked down at his boots. Only one person moved. A chief warrant officer with silver threads in her dark hair detached herself from the group near the coffee maker. "Sir," she said carefully, "Captain Chen's orders show she's fully mission qualified." Brennan waved dismissively. "We'll see, Rodriguez. We'll see." He looked back at Chun. "Report for flight ops tomorrow, 0600. We've got a milk run to one of the mountain outposts. Should be simple enough, even for a beginner." He walked past her toward his office, pausing at the doorway. "Don't be late, Cupcake. I hate waiting." The door closed behind him. The room remained silent for a moment before conversations resumed in low tones. Rodriguez approached Chun, extending her hand. "Maria Rodriguez, senior warrant officer for the company. Don't mind Brennan. He's like that with everyone at first." Chun shook her hand, noting the firmness of Rodriguez's grip and the directness of her gaze. The lie hung between them, obvious to both. "It's fine," Chun said. "I've dealt with worse." Rodriguez's expression suggested she doubted that, but wasn't going to argue in front of the others. "Walk with me," she said quietly. "I'll show you where everything is." They moved into the hallway, their boots echoing off concrete walls lined with photos of previous squadron commanders and aircraft tail numbers. Rodriguez led Chun away from the ready room before speaking again. Her voice dropped low enough that passing airmen wouldn't overhear. "Brennan has driven out 3 female pilots in the last 18 months. 3. They all transferred, requesting new duty stations within 6 months of arriving. Chun absorbed this information, filing it alongside her earlier observations. What's his pattern? Rodriguez glanced back toward the ready room. Starts with the nicknames and the condescension. Escalates to impossible assignments, manufacture complaints, paperwork nightmares. He makes the environment so toxic that women request transfers just to escape. She paused at a window overlooking the flight line. The previous battalion commander ignored it. The current one is Brennan's friend from flight school. Chun watched two Chinooks lifting off in formation, their tandem rotors creating distinctive whump-whump sounds that rattled the window glass. Why are you telling me this? Because you're going to need allies, Rodriguez replied. And because I'm tired of watching good pilots get forced out while everyone pretends not to notice. She pulled out her phone and typed rapidly. That's my direct number. You need anything, you call me. Day or night. Thank you, Chun said simply. Rodriguez studied her for a moment longer. You seem pretty calm about all this. Most people would be upset after that performance in there. I've been underestimated before, Chun replied. Usually by people who should know better. She turned away from the window. Where are the pilot quarters? I need to get settled in. Building 3200, Rodriguez said. But Chun, whatever you did before this assignment, wherever those classified rotations took you, it's clear you've got more experience than your rank suggests. Brennan doesn't know who he's messing with, does he? Chin's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. Guess we'll find out, she said. They walked back through the complex, Rodriguez pointing out essential locations. Operations Center, maintenance hangars, flight planning room. Other pilots passed them in the corridors, some nodding greetings, others pretending absorption in their phones. The base sprawled across the Colorado landscape like a small city, housing thousands of soldiers and families. Some of you watching probably know this place, Chun thought absently. Half of Colorado seems to have connections to Fort Carson. Drop your location in the comments if you're from Colorado Springs or Denver. Rodriguez left Chun at the door to her assigned quarters, a small room with a narrow bed, government-issued desk, and metal wall locker. Chun unpacked methodically, placing her uniforms on hangers with precise spacing, arranging her flight gear in the locker with practiced efficiency. Her personal items fit in a single drawer. Photos of her parents, a few books, nothing that revealed anything about the years missing from her official file. She sat on the bed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the standard check-in emails. One message caught her attention, a brief note from a Pentagon address with no signature, just a question. Everything proceeding normally? Chun typed a quick reply. Affirmative. Situation manageable. She hesitated before sending, then added, for now. Outside her window, the sun tracked lower toward the mountains, painting the peaks gold and crimson. Helicopters continued their training patterns, dark silhouettes against the brilliant sky. Chun watched them and thought about tomorrow's flight, about Major Brennan's smirking confidence, about Rodriguez's warning. She'd faced worse than a bully with a badge. Much worse. But those battles had been in places where the rules were different, where survival mattered more than protocol, where her reputation preceded her and her decorations spoke louder than any introduction. Here, she was just another captain with a mysterious file and a condescending nickname. Here, she would have to prove herself all over again, this time within the careful boundaries of military regulations and proper channels. Chun smiled slightly, expression that never reached her eyes. She'd done harder things than dealing with Major Derek Brennan. The question wasn't whether she could handle him. The question was how much rope she'd give him before he hanged himself with it. Tomorrow would be interesting. She set her alarm for 0430 and turned off the light. The flight line at 0600 smelled like jet fuel and cold mountain air. Chun arrived 15 minutes early, her flight gear squared away and her pre-flight checklist already memorized. 3 Chinooks sat in formation on the tarmac, their massive bodies casting long shadows in the dawn light. Ground crews moved between them with practiced efficiency, checking hydraulics and fuel levels. Major Brennan emerged from the operations building with another officer trailing behind him. This is Captain Kyle Morrison, Brennan announced without preamble. My deputy. He'll be riding along on your little mountain trip today. Consider it a formal evaluation of your capabilities. Chen recognized the maneuver immediately. Morrison looked uncomfortable with his assignment, his eyes not quite meeting hers as they shook hands. The evaluation rider represented a new element in Brennan's campaign, transforming a routine cargo flight into official scrutiny. Understood, sir, Chen replied. Mission brief? Brennan handed her a tablet showing the flight plan. Simple cargo run to Firebase McKinley. Medical supplies and mail. 43 miles northwest. Elevation gain of 4,000 feet. He smiled thinly. Weather's supposed to be clear. Should be easy enough for someone with your extensive experience. Chen studied the route, noting the narrow approach corridor between two peaks and the landing zone's small footprint. McKinley sat on a ridge with limited maneuvering room, surrounded by updrafts and unpredictable wind shear. The mission parameters were challenging but well within acceptable limits for any competent pilot. Morrison climbed into the observer's seat behind the cockpit, pulling out a notepad and securing his harness. Chun ran through her pre-flight checks with methodical precision, her hands moving across switches and gauges with the kind of muscle memory that came from thousands of hours in similar aircraft. Everything showed green. The Chinook's twin turbines spooled up with a rising whine that Chun felt in her chest. She lifted off smoothly, transitioning from hover to forward flight as the base dropped away beneath them. The Rocky Mountains filled the windscreen, their peaks sharp and bright against the morning sky. Morrison leaned forward, his voice coming through the intercom. Your control inputs are very precise, Captain. Where did you do your advanced training? Various locations, Chen replied neutrally. She banked left, following the valley northwest toward their destination. The Chinook responded to her touch like an extension of her body, each correction minimal and exact. The flight proceeded without incident for the first 20 minutes. Then the terrain began its steep climb, forcing Chun to thread between two granite peaks that rose like walls on either side. Winds buffeted the aircraft as competing air currents met and swirled. Chun made constant adjustments, reading the invisible currents through subtle changes in the Chinook's behavior. Morrison's pen moved rapidly across his notepad. Have you flown in mountains before? Some, Chen answered. Her attention stayed focused on the approaching firebase, now visible as a small collection of structures clinging to a narrow ridge. The landing zone looked even tighter than the satellite images had suggested, barely wide enough for the Chinook's 40-foot rotor span. She brought the aircraft into a hover above the LZ, adjusting for the crosswinds that tried to push her sideways toward the cliff edge. Ground crew members below scrambled to secure the cargo nets. Chen held the aircraft steady despite gusts that would have made lesser pilots abort the approach. 3 minutes later, the supplies were offloaded and she lifted away, rotating the nose downward to dive out of the mountain bowl. Morrison said nothing during the return flight, but his pen never stopped moving. When they landed back at Fort Carson, he gathered his notes and exited quickly. Chen secured the aircraft and completed her post-flight paperwork with the same attention to detail she'd shown in the air. She found Rodriguez in the maintenance hangar 2 hours later, reviewing service records on one of the company's helicopters. The warrant officer looked up as Chun approached, her expression already concerned. How did it go? Rodriguez asked. Textbook, Chun replied. No issues with the aircraft or the mission. Rodriguez set down her clipboard. Morrison reported to Brennan 90 minutes ago. Closed-door meeting. Whatever he wrote in his evaluation, Brennan didn't like it. Chen absorbed this information silently. She'd expected criticism regardless of performance. That was how this kind of campaign worked. Manufacture problems where none existed, document phantom deficiencies, build a paper trail that justified predetermined conclusions. Evening brought new complications. Chen discovered her maintenance logs had been flagged for irregular pre-flight procedures, a notation that appeared in the digital system without any direct communication to her. The flags referenced non-existent deviations from standard checklists, claiming she'd skipped mandatory steps that her own documentation proved she completed. Rodriguez found her in the hangar at 1900 hours, still reviewing the contested logs. "I've seen this before," Rodriguez said quietly, ensuring no other personnel were within earshot. Brennan used the exact same tactic on Lieutenant Emma Park. Manufactured maintenance discrepancies, claimed safety violations that never happened. He buried her under so much paperwork that she finally gave up and requested transfer. Chen looked up from the tablet. "How long did Park last?" 6 months. Rodriguez pulled up a chair, her voice dropping even lower. "The pilot before her, Captain Jessica Lynn, lasted 4 months. Before that, Warrant Officer Teresa Gomez made it 8 months, but only because she filed a formal complaint. The complaint went nowhere, and she transferred anyway. 3 pilots in 18 months, Chen said. All women, all driven out by the same commander. And nobody stopped him." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. The previous battalion commander was spineless. The current one, Colonel Foster, went to flight school with Brennan. They're friends. Foster has made it clear he considers complaints about Brennan to be signs of weakness from pilots who can't handle the pressure of military aviation. Chen set down the tablet and leaned back in her chair. She'd dealt with toxic leaders before, but usually in environments where direct confrontation was an option, where the chain of command functioned properly, where accountability existed. Here, the system itself seemed designed to protect Brennan while sacrificing the careers of anyone who challenged him. "What's your advice?" Chen asked. Rodriguez hesitated before answering. "Document everything. Save every email, every text, every official notation. Keep copies outside the military system in case files mysteriously disappear. And find allies outside the battalion who can help if this escalates beyond what Foster will ignore." "That sounds like you're preparing for war," Chen observed. Rodriguez met her eyes directly. "That's because it is war, Captain. Brennan has been winning it for 18 months. The question is whether you're ready to fight back or if you're going to be the 4th transfer request he forces through." Chen thought about her phone message from the Pentagon, about the years of her service record that remained classified, about the decorations that currently sat in a locked box in her quarters because wearing them would invite questions she couldn't answer. She thought about the missions she'd flown where failure meant death, where her skill had kept people alive against impossible odds, where her reputation had been earned in blood and fire. And now she was being harassed by a peacetime bully who measured his authority by how many women he could drive away from their chosen profession. "I'm not transferring," Chen said simply. Rodriguez smiled, an expression with more steel than warmth. "Good. Then we need to start building your defense now, before Brennan escalates further. Because he will escalate. That's his pattern. First the nicknames and condescension, then the manufactured complaints. After that, he'll start creating situations designed to make you fail publicly." "What kind of situations?" "Impossible assignments. Aircraft with phantom mechanical issues. Flight schedules that set you up for fatigue violations." Rodriguez pulled out her phone and began typing. "I'm sending you contact information for the 3 pilots who transferred out." Park kept detailed records. Lynn saved screenshots and emails. "If we can establish the pattern with documentary evidence, we might be able to bypass Foster and take this to brigade level." Chen watched Rodriguez work, impressed by the warrant officer's methodical approach and quiet determination. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the 2nd pilot transferred," Rodriguez admitted. "I couldn't save Park or Lynn. I didn't have enough evidence with Gomez. But I've been collecting information ever since, waiting for someone who would stay and fight instead of running." She looked up from her phone. "I think you're that person." "What makes you so sure?" Rodriguez's smile widened slightly. "Because you walked into that ready room yesterday, got publicly humiliated by a superior officer, and your heart rate probably didn't even spike. Whatever you did during those classified rotations, it prepared you for worse than Major Derek Brennan." She finished typing and put away her phone. "The question isn't whether you can handle him. The question is whether you're willing to do what it takes to stop him from doing this to the next woman who shows up here." Chen stood and gathered her gear. "I'll contact Park and Lynn. Get their stories documented. Start building the case." Rodriguez nodded. "Be careful, Captain. Brennan may be a bully, but he's also smart. He survived this long because he knows how to work the system and who to cultivate as protectors. Foster won't help you. You're going to need allies at brigade level or higher. I'll work on that, Chen said. She left the hangar as twilight settled over the mountains, turning the snow-covered peaks purple and gold. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rodriguez containing contact information for all 3 transfer pilots. Another message waited below it, this one from the same Pentagon address as before. Monitoring situation. Resources available if needed. Chen typed a careful response. Situation developing. Will advise if assistance required. She walked back to her quarters through the cooling evening air, thinking about patterns and documentation, about allies and escalation, about the long game that stretched ahead. Brennan thought he was dealing with just another captain he could bully into submission. He had no idea who she actually was or what she'd survived to get here. That ignorance was his weakness. Chen intended to exploit it fully. Rodriguez spent her off-duty hours in the battalion archives, a windowless room in the basement of the headquarters building where personnel files gathered dust alongside maintenance records and training rosters. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she navigated through digital databases that most soldiers never knew existed. She started with the obvious transfer requests from Alpha Company over the past 3 years. The pattern emerged immediately. Lieutenant Emma Park, transfer approved March 2024 after 6 months under Brennan's command. Captain Jessica Lynn, transfer approved September 2023 after 4 months. Warrant Officer Teresa Gomez, transfer approved January 2023 after 8 months. 3 women, 3 transfers, all citing personal reasons in their official paperwork. Rodriguez dug deeper, pulling up their performance evaluations. Park's ratings had declined steadily during her time at Fort Carson despite exemplary marks from her previous assignments. Lynn's file contained 3 counseling statements for minor infractions that wouldn't normally warrant documentation. Gomez's records showed a formal complaint filed in November 2022, investigated by the battalion equal opportunity officer, and closed as unsubstantiated 2 weeks later. She photographed each relevant page with her phone, building a digital archive that existed outside official channels. The complaint system had failed Gomez. Rodriguez wasn't going to let it fail Chun without a fight. Her phone rang at 2200 hours. Emma Park's voice came through cautious and quiet, like someone who'd learned to watch her words. You said this was about Brennan? Yes, Rodriguez confirmed. We have a new pilot. He's already started the same pattern with her. I need to know what happened to you. Park's silence stretched long enough that Rodriguez thought the call had dropped. Then the words came in a rush, 3 months of suppressed frustration finally finding release. It started with nicknames. Sweetheart, Princess, Little Bird, always in front of other pilots, always with that smirk. When I didn't react, he escalated. Impossible flight schedules. Assignments during mandatory crew rest periods. Aircraft with phantom mechanical issues that maintenance could never verify. Rodriguez listened, taking notes as Park described a campaign that matched what Chun was already experiencing. Did you document everything? I tried, Park replied, but files started disappearing from my locker. Emails vanished from my account. When I went to the Equal Opportunity office, they told me I needed more concrete evidence. By the time I'd gathered enough proof, I was so exhausted from fighting that transfer seemed easier than continuing the battle. Do you still have any of that evidence? Park's voice brightened slightly. I kept copies of everything on a personal drive. Screenshots, emails, text messages, recordings of conversations. I couldn't use it at the time because I'd already signed transfer papers, but I saved it all in case someone else needed it someday. I need it now, Rodriguez said. Can you send it to me? Give me your secure email. I'll upload everything tonight. Rodriguez provided the address and ended the call, immediately dialing the next number. Jessica Lynn answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with recognition. Let me guess. Brennan's doing it again. New pilot just arrived, Rodriguez confirmed. Captain Sareth Chun. He called her Cupcake on day 1. Lynn's bitter laugh carried clearly through the phone. Of course he did. I was Sunshine. Gomez was Dollface. He's got a whole repertoire of condescending pet names. She paused, and Rodriguez heard ice clinking in a glass. What do you need from me? Your story, your documentation, anything that proves the pattern. Lynn spent 20 minutes describing her 4 months at Fort Carson, a compressed nightmare of escalating harassment that culminated in Brennan filing a formal complaint against her for supposedly damaging an aircraft during landing. The maintenance investigation found no evidence of pilot error, but the complaint remained in her file as a permanent black mark on her record. I have emails, Lynn said, screenshots of text messages where he told me women shouldn't fly combat aircraft, photos of duty rosters showing me scheduled for back-to-back flights that violated crew rest regulations. I saved everything because I knew someday someone would need proof that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't all in my head. Send it to me, Rodriguez requested. Secure email. She gathered the second set of documentation, adding it to Park's files as they arrived throughout the night. By 0300, Rodriguez had compiled a devastating portrait of systematic harassment spanning 3 victims over 18 months. The evidence was irrefutable. Same tactics, same escalation pattern, same outcome. Morning brought a new development. Rodriguez met with Battalion Sergeant Major James Parker in his office at 0700. Parker had served 28 years, most of it as an enlisted aviator before transitioning to the sergeant major ranks. His weathered face and gray hair spoke to decades of experience in Army aviation. He listened without interruption as Rodriguez laid out everything. The 3 transferred pilots, the documented pattern, the evidence she'd compiled. When she finished, Parker leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes with both hands. I filed a complaint about Brennan 14 months ago, he said quietly. Took it straight to the previous battalion commander. Told him we had a systemic problem with how female pilots were being treated in Alpha Company. What happened? The commander thanked me for my concern and said he'd look into it. 3 weeks later, he retired. Colonel Foster took command, and the issue disappeared like it never existed. Parker opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. I kept my original complaint letter. Every email I sent following up. Every promise of action that led nowhere. Rodriguez accepted the folder, adding it to her growing collection. Why didn't you take it higher? Parker's expression hardened. Because Foster made it clear that anyone who pursued complaints against Brennan would be considered disloyal to the battalion. He's protected Brennan at every turn, dismissed every concern, painted every woman who transferred as someone who couldn't handle the pressure of military aviation. She met Parker's eyes directly. Foster and Brennan were flight school classmates. They're friends. So Foster's part of the problem, Rodriguez concluded. Parker nodded slowly, which means any solution has to bypass him entirely. You'll need to go to brigade level, maybe higher. And you'll need evidence so overwhelming that Foster can't dismiss it or bury it. Rodriguez spread the documentation across Parker's desk. Emails, screenshots, transfer requests, counseling statements, performance evaluations. This is 3 victims over 18 months. Same pattern, same tactics, same outcome every time. If we can prove Foster knew and did nothing, we can take this to brigade commander. Parker examined the evidence with the careful attention of someone who'd spent a career evaluating situations and making critical decisions. This is good, he said finally, but you need more. You need current documentation of Brennan's behavior, not just historical pattern. You need witnesses who'll testify, not just victims who've already left. And you need someone at brigade level who'll actually listen. I'm working on the first 2, Rodriguez replied. Do you know anyone at brigade who might help? Parker considered the question carefully. Brigade Command Sergeant Major Andrew Mitchell. We served together at Fort Campbell 15 years ago. He's solid, by the book, doesn't tolerate toxic leadership. If I brought this to him directly, he'd listen. But once I do that, there's no walking it back. I'll be going outside my chain of command, undermining my own battalion commander. My career could end right alongside Brennan's. Rodriguez met his gaze steadily. Is it a risk you're willing to take? Parker looked at the evidence spread across his desk, at the documentation of 3 destroyed careers and 1 commander who'd been allowed to continue his campaign unchecked. If this was your daughter being harassed, he said quietly, "What would you want someone like me to do?" "The right thing," Rodriguez answered, "regardless of the personal cost." "Then that's what I'll do," Parker replied. "But we need to time this carefully. If we move too early with insufficient evidence, Foster will shut us down and destroy any chance of future action. If we wait too long, Captain Chun becomes victim number 4, and we've accomplished nothing." Rodriguez gathered the documentation back into her folder. "Chin's not transferring. She's made that clear, which means Brennan will escalate until he forces her out or breaks her. Based on the pattern with the other 3, that escalation will happen fast." "How fast?" "Park lasted 6 months, but that included 3 months of investigation and appeals. Lin lasted 4 months and left before formal complaints could be filed. Gomez lasted 8 months, but only because she fought back hard." Rodriguez checked her phone, calculating timelines. "Chin's been here 2 days, and Brennan's already manufacturing maintenance violations. I'd say we have 2 weeks, maybe 3, before he does something that forces immediate action." Parker pulled out his own phone and began typing. "I'll contact Mitchell today, set up a preliminary conversation, feel him out about the situation without providing specifics yet. If he's receptive, we'll know we have an ally at brigade level when we need one." Rodriguez stood to leave, the folder of evidence tucked securely under her arm. "One more thing, Sergeant Major. Chin's service record has classified sections. Gaps in her assignments that personnel won't discuss. Whatever she did before coming here, it required special operations clearances." Parker's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's interesting. Brennan's harassing someone who might have connections well above his pay grade." "The irony isn't lost on me," Rodriguez agreed. "But Chin's keeping those connections quiet, trying to handle this through normal channels. We need to make sure normal channels actually work for once." "Agreed." Parker walked her to the door. "Keep me informed of any developments. The moment Brennan crosses a line, we can document clearly. We move fast, and we move hard. No more women get driven out of this battalion because one commander thinks his rank gives him permission to abuse people." Rodriguez left Parker's office as the morning sun climbed higher over the mountains, casting long shadows across the parade ground. She had allies now, documentation that proved the pattern, and a plan to bypass the battalion commander who'd protected Brennan for over a year. The question was whether they could execute that plan before Brennan escalated his campaign against Chun into something that couldn't be walked back. Based on everything Rodriguez had learned about his tactics, that escalation was coming soon. Very soon. The morning flight brief began at 05:30 with Brennan standing before a topographical map of the Colorado high country. Chun sat in the second row, her flight suit crisp and her attention focused on the terrain features Brennan was outlining with a laser pointer. "High-altitude, mountain rescue training," Brennan announced. "Firebase Wilson sits at 10,000 feet elevation in a narrow box canyon. Landing zone is approximately 60 feet wide, with 40-knot crosswinds forecast. Approach corridor requires threading between 2 granite walls with minimal clearance." He turned to face the assembled pilots, his gaze settling on Chun. "This mission has a 60% abort rate. Most pilots can't handle the combination of altitude, winds, and terrain." Chun studied the map without reaction. The approach looked challenging, but manageable for anyone with proper training. The winds were strong, but within operational limits. The altitude was high, but well below the Chinook service ceiling. "Captain Chun, you'll be primary pilot on this one," Brennan continued. "Consider it a skills assessment. If you can't handle it, we'll know you're not qualified for the more demanding missions we run here." Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sir, that's typically a mission we assign to our most experienced mountain pilots. Maybe Captain Chun should observe first before attempting it herself." Brennan's smile held no warmth. "Captain Morrison, are you suggesting our new pilot isn't capable of handling standard training missions? That seems like something we should know sooner rather than later." He looked back at Chun. "Unless you'd like to decline the assignment. Cupcake, no shame in knowing your limitations." Chun met his eyes directly. "I accept the mission, sir. When do we launch?" "Oh, 800, Brennan replied. You'll have Captain Morrison as observer again. I'm sure he'll provide a thorough evaluation of your performance." The brief concluded and pilots dispersed to their pre-flight routines. Rodriguez caught Chun in the hallway, her expression tight with concern. "That mission is designed to make you fail. 60% abort rate means 6 out of 10 pilots can't complete it safely. Brennan's setting you up for public failure." "Then I won't fail," Chun said simply. Rodriguez grabbed her arm, lowering her voice further. "Listen to me. 3 months ago, Brennan assigned Lynn to a similar impossible mission. She attempted it, encountered worse conditions than forecast, had to abort the approach. Brennan used that abort as evidence of incompetence in her evaluation. It was the beginning of the end for her." Chin appreciated Rodriguez's concern, but the mathematics were straightforward. If 60% of pilots aborted, that meant 40% succeeded. She'd faced far worse odds in places Rodriguez couldn't imagine. A difficult approach in Colorado mountains didn't rate on the scale of actual threats she'd survived. "I'll complete the mission," Chin assured her. "Just make sure you document what happened in this brief. The fact that Brennan assigned this to me on my second day, the way he set it up as a public test. We'll need that documentation later." Rodriguez released her arm reluctantly. "I'll be recording everything. Please be careful up there." Chin spent the next 2 hours in detailed flight planning, studying weather patterns and calculating fuel loads for high-altitude operations. Morrison joined her at the planning table, spreading out approach plates and emergency procedures. "For what it's worth," Morrison said quietly, "this is bullshit. You shouldn't be flying this mission. It's inappropriate tasking for someone with 2 days at this base." "Appreciated," Chin replied without looking up from her calculations. "But I'm going to fly it anyway, and I'm going to complete it successfully. The question is whether your evaluation will reflect reality or whatever Brennan wants you to write." Morrison's jaw tightened. "My evaluation will be honest, whatever that costs me." They launched at 0800 with perfect visibility and temperatures already climbing toward the afternoon highs. Chun flew northwest toward the mountain range, climbing steadily as the terrain rose beneath them. The Chinook handled well at altitude, its twin turbines providing ample power even in the thinner air. The approach to Firebase Wilson appeared exactly as advertised, a narrow canyon with granite walls rising sheer on both sides and crosswinds funneling through the gap like water through a fire hose. Chun could see the Firebase perched on a small plateau, its landing zone barely wider than a Chinook's rotor span. She began her approach with careful precision, adjusting constantly for the buffeting winds that tried to push her sideways into the canyon walls. The aircraft shook and yawed, but Chin's control inputs kept them centered in the approach corridor. Her hands moved across the controls with the kind of fluid certainty that came from far more experience than her official record suggested. Morrison watched in silence, his pen motionless on his notepad. The granite walls flashed past on either side, close enough that individual rock faces were visible. Chun descended into the canyon, reading the wind shifts through subtle changes in the Chinook's behavior, making corrections before the gusts fully developed. The landing zone rushed up to meet them. Chin brought the aircraft into a hover, holding position despite 14-knot crosswinds that would have defeated less skilled pilots. She set the Chinook down with barely a bump, the wheels touching simultaneously as if she'd landed on a calm day at sea level. Ground crew at Firebase Wilson stared in apparent disbelief. The Firebase commander, a captain with weather-beaten features, approached as Chun shut down the engines. "That was the cleanest approach I've seen in 6 months," he told her. "Most pilots abort halfway through the canyon. The ones who make it usually bounce hard enough to rattle our teeth." "Just following the approach parameters," Chun replied neutrally. The return flight proceeded without incident. Chun executed the departure perfectly, climbing out of the canyon with the same precise control she'd shown on approach. Morrison filled 3 pages of notes, his pen moving rapidly as they flew back toward Fort Carson. They landed at 10:30, 2.5 hours after departure. Chun completed her post-flight paperwork and secured the aircraft. Morrison disappeared immediately toward Brennan's office. Rodriguez found Chun in the pilot-ready room an hour later. Morrison submitted his evaluation. Brennan called him in for a closed-door meeting. It lasted 45 minutes, and I could hear shouting through the door. What was the substance? Chun asked. Rodriguez checked her phone, reading from notes she'd compiled. Morrison's evaluation called your performance exceptional. He used words like masterful, precise, and highly skilled. He recommended you immediately for advanced mission qualifications based on demonstrated capability. And Brennan didn't like that, Chun concluded. Rodriguez's expression turned grim. Brennan wanted Morrison to write that you showed poor judgment, took unnecessary risks, and demonstrated insufficient skill for complex missions. When Morrison refused, Brennan accused him of being influenced by political correctness and told him to revise the evaluation. Did Morrison revise it? No. He told Brennan the evaluation stands as written because it reflects observable reality. Then he walked out. Chun absorbed this information, recognizing it as both progress and complication. Morrison had broken ranks with Brennan, which meant they had an insider witness to corroborate the harassment pattern. It also meant Brennan would likely escalate rather than back down. That evening brought confirmation of the escalation. Chun received notification through the digital operations system that she was grounded pending investigation of potential safety violations. The notification provided no specifics, no timeline, no opportunity for response. Just a simple flag in the system that prevented her from being assigned flight duties. She found Rodriguez in the maintenance hangar at 1900 hours. The warrant officer looked at the notification and her face darkened with anger. This is the same tactic he used on Lynn. Groundings based on phantom safety concerns that can't be appealed or challenged until formal investigation concludes. The investigation takes weeks, and by then the damage to your reputation is done. How do we fight this? Chun asked. Rodriguez pulled out her phone. We stopped playing by Brennan's rules. She dialed a number and waited. Sergeant Major Parker? It's Rodriguez. Brennan just grounded Captain Chun. Yes, sir. Manufactured safety violation. No, sir. She completed an impossible mission flawlessly, and now she's being punished for it. She paused, listening. Yes, sir, I think it's time. She ended the call and looked at Chun. Parker's contacting Brigade Command Sergeant Major Mitchell tonight. We're done trying to work through battalion channels. This goes to Brigade, levels starting tomorrow. What about Foster? Chun asked. Won't he try to block it? Rodriguez's smile held no humor. Parker's going outside the officer chain of command. He's using the NCO support channel, which means Foster doesn't get a say until Brigade Command is already involved. By the time Foster realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to contain it. Chun walked to the hangar entrance and stared out at the flight line, where Chinooks sat dark and silent against the evening sky. She'd been grounded before, but always as part of mission planning or maintenance scheduling, never as punishment for doing her job correctly. The injustice of it burned, but the strategic part of her mind recognized this as an opportunity. Brennan had overplayed his hand. He'd assigned an impossible mission expecting failure and received exceptional performance. When that didn't work, he'd manufactured a safety violation that had no basis in reality. The pattern was now undeniable and documented by multiple witnesses, including his own deputy. The question was whether the institutional response would arrive before Brennan escalated again. Because Chun knew with absolute certainty that grounding her wouldn't be his final move. Men like Brennan didn't back down when challenged. They doubled down, convinced that their authority protected them from consequences. She thought about the message from the Pentagon, about the resources available if needed, about the connections she deliberately avoided using because she wanted to resolve this through normal channels. Those channels were opening now, just more slowly than she'd hoped. Rodriguez joined her at the hangar entrance. This isn't over, the warrant officer said quietly. Brennan's going to get worse before he gets better. You need to be ready for whatever comes next. I'm ready, Chun replied. She'd been ready since the moment Brennan called her Cupcake in front of the entire squadron. The only question had been how long she'd wait before finishing this. The waiting was almost over. Brigade Command Sergeant Major Andrew Mitchell received Parker's call at 0700 while reviewing the daily operations brief in his office at brigade headquarters. He listened without interruption as Parker laid out the situation in careful, measured terms. Systematic harassment of female pilots, documented pattern across 3 victims, manufactured safety violations, battalion command obstruction. How solid is your evidence? Mitchell asked when Parker finished. 3 complete sets of documentation from transferred pilots. Screenshots, emails, performance evaluations showing declining ratings despite no actual performance issues. Current victim has been grounded on false pretenses after completing an expert-level mission flawlessly. Parker's voice carried the weight of 28 years making difficult calls. And I have Morrison's evaluation stating Chen's performance was exceptional, followed immediately by Brennan grounding her for safety violations that don't exist in any official report. Mitchell pulled up his computer and began typing. Send everything to my secure email. I want to see all of it before I brief the brigade commander. He paused, considering the implications. You understand that once I bring this to Colonel Martinez, there's no containing it. If your evidence supports what you're saying, this becomes a formal brigade investigation. Battalion politics won't protect anyone. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Parker replied. Foster's been covering for Brennan since he took command. Normal channels are compromised. We need intervention from above. Mitchell ended the call and spent the next 3 hours reviewing the documentation as it arrived. Emma Parks meticulously maintained records. Jessica Lynn's screenshots and saved emails. Teresa Gomez's formal complaint that had been closed as unsubstantiated despite clear evidence. Morrison's evaluation of Chen's mountain flight paired with the grounding order that appeared hours later. The pattern was undeniable. Same tactics, same escalation, same outcome across multiple victims. Mitchell had seen toxic leadership before during his 3 decades in uniform, but rarely documented so thoroughly and rarely protected so blatantly by battalion command. He walked the evidence to Brigade Commander Colonel Sarah Martinez's office at 1100 hours. Martinez was a compact woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for running the tightest brigade in 4th Infantry Division. She looked up from her computer as Mitchell entered. "This had better be important," she said. "I have a commander's conference in 30 minutes. "It's important," Mitchell confirmed. He spread the documentation across her desk. "We have a systematic harassment problem in 4th Aviation Battalion. Multiple female pilots driven out over 18 months. Battalion commander aware, but taking no action. Current situation involves a newly assigned captain who's been grounded on false charges after completing a high-difficulty mission perfectly." Martinez began reading, her expression growing darker with each page. She examined Park's records, then Lynn's emails, then Gomez's complaint. When she reached Morrison's evaluation and the subsequent grounding order, she set down the papers and looked at Mitchell directly. "How long has this been going on?" 18 months, minimum based on documented cases. Possibly longer if we dig deeper into battalion transfer records. Martinez stood and walked to her window overlooking the brigade motor pool. "And Colonel Foster knew?" According to Sergeant Major Parker, Foster was informed 14 months ago and took no action. Parker has documentation of his original complaint and Foster's dismissal of it. Martinez turned back from the window, her jaw set. Foster and this Major Brennan were flight school classmates, which explains the protection, Mitchell observed, but not the systematic failure of the equal opportunity system, the chain of command, and every safeguard we have in place to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. Martinez pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. "Cancel my afternoon schedule. Get Lieutenant Colonel David Chun from Brigade Legal here immediately." She looked at Mitchell. "That's his actual name? David Chun? No relation to the victim," Mitchell confirmed. "But yes, that's our senior legal officer." Martinez's expression suggested she saw the irony. "Have LTC Chun bring his investigation team. Full court press on this starting now. I want every witness interviewed, every document reviewed, every claim verified or disproven." She tapped the grounding order. And I want to know what's actually in Captain Sarah Chen's service record. Those classification markers suggest there's more to her background than standard aviation career. Mitchell nodded. I'll set it up. What about Foster? He's suspended from command effective immediately, pending investigation outcome. Brigade XO takes over 4th Aviation until this is resolved. Martinez sat back down and began drafting orders. I will not have toxic leadership poisoning my brigade. If the evidence supports what's in these documents, Brennan is done and Foster will face accountability for enabling him. Lieutenant Colonel David Chun arrived 30 minutes later with 2 paralegals and a senior investigator from the Inspector General's office. Martinez briefed them on the situation while Mitchell distributed copies of all documentation. David Chun reviewed the materials with the careful attention of someone who understood that careers would end based on his findings. How recent is the current victim's grounding? Yesterday evening, Mitchell replied. She flew a high-altitude mountain rescue training mission that has a 60% abort rate. Completed it flawlessly according to multiple witnesses, including Brennan's own deputy. Grounded 6 hours later. David Chin made notes on his tablet. I'll need to interview Captain Sarah Chin first. Get her perspective and review her service record. He looked up at Martinez. Ma'am, those classification markers in her file suggest special operations background. I may need clearances from SOCOM to access her full record. Get whatever clearances you need, Martinez ordered. I want the complete picture of who we're dealing with. Both the victim and the perpetrator. The investigation team departed to begin interviews. Martinez turned to Mitchell. How many female pilots do we have across the brigade? Mitchell checked his roster. 47 total across 4 battalions. I want every single one of them interviewed. Anonymous surveys about their experiences, their observations of leadership climate, any harassment they've witnessed or experienced. If this is happening in 4th Aviation, I need to know if it's happening elsewhere. She pulled up her calendar, and I want a commander's call for the entire brigade scheduled for next week. Every leader from sergeant to colonel needs to hear directly from me that this behavior will not be tolerated. Mitchell made notes. What's our timeline for completing the investigation? Martinez's expression hardened. Fast. We move fast, and we move thoroughly. Brennan remains in his position until we have completed findings, but he's on administrative restriction pending outcome. No contact with Captain Chun, no retaliation against witnesses, no destruction of evidence. If he violates any of those conditions, he's relieved immediately. And Foster? He's suspended, but not relieved yet. If investigation shows he merely failed to act rather than actively covered up, there may be room for administrative action short of relief. If he actively protected Brennan knowing about the harassment, his career is over. Mitchell gathered his materials. I'll coordinate with LTC Chun on the investigation timeline. One more thing, Martinez said as Mitchell reached the door. Find out who Captain Chen's previous commander was. Someone at SOCOM knows her background and her capabilities. I want to understand why a pilot with classified special operations experience took a routine assignment at a conventional aviation battalion. Mitchell paused. You think there's more to this story? Martinez gestured the documentation spread across her desk. A captain with special operations background accepts routine assignment at Fort Carson. Gets harassed immediately by a commander who doesn't know who she is. Completes impossible missions without breaking a sweat. And according to these reports, maintains professional composure throughout escalating harassment that would break most people. She looked at Mitchell directly. Either she's the most resilient officer I've ever heard of, or she's been through things that make Major Brennan look like an annoying mosquito by comparison. Probably both, Mitchell observed. Find out, Martinez ordered, because I have a feeling we're about to discover that Major Brennan picked the wrong woman to harass. Mitchell left her office and immediately contacted Parker with an update. The brigade commander is fully engaged. Investigation starting today. Foster suspended, Brennan on administrative restriction. Tell Captain Chun that help has arrived. Parker's relief was audible through the phone. How long until resolution? Days, not weeks, Mitchell replied. Colonel Martinez is treating this as priority 1. She's not going to let it drag out while Brennan continues his campaign. What should Chen do in the meantime? Stay professional, document everything, cooperate fully with investigators, and stay away from Brennan. If he tries to contact her or retaliate in any way, that's grounds for immediate relief. Parker ended the call and immediately contacted Rodriguez with the news. The warrant officer was in the hangar with Chun when the call came through. She listened, then turned to Chun with the first genuine smile in days. Brigade's involved. Full investigation starting today. Colonel Martinez herself is overseeing it. Foster suspended. Brennan's restricted from contact with you. Chun absorbed this information calmly, though something shifted in her expression. How thorough will the investigation be? Rodriguez checked her phone where Parker had sent additional details. Complete. Every witness, every document, full review of your service record, including classified portions. LTC Chun from Brigade, Legal wants to interview you first thing tomorrow morning. Chun nodded slowly. Then I need to make some phone calls tonight. If they're reviewing my classified record, certain people need to be notified. Rodriguez studied her carefully. Who exactly are you, Captain Chun? Chen's slight smile suggested layers of answers to that question, most of which couldn't be shared in an unsecured hangar. Someone who's been through worse than Major Brennan, she replied. Someone who's been waiting for the system to work the way it's supposed to. And someone who's about to make sure Brennan understands exactly who he's been calling Cupcake for the past 2 weeks. The wheels were in motion now, Mitchell thought as he reviewed his notes in his office that evening. The institutional response had finally mobilized at full strength. The question wasn't whether justice would be served. The question was how completely Brennan's career would implode when the full truth emerged. Very completely, Mitchell suspected. Very completely indeed. Lieutenant Colonel David Chun began his interviews at 0800 in a conference room at Brigade headquarters, away from the politics and tensions of 4th Aviation Battalion. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing every document in the growing case file, building a timeline that stretched across 3 victims and 18 months of systematic harassment. Captain Sarah Chun arrived precisely on time, her uniform immaculate and her bearing suggesting military discipline that went deeper than standard officer training. David Chun noted the way she moved, the economy of motion, the constant situational awareness that marked people who'd operated in genuinely dangerous environments. Captain Chun, thank you for coming. Please sit. He gestured to a chair across the conference table. I'm Lieutenant Colonel David Chun from Brigade Legal. No relation, despite the name. Sarah Chen's slight smile acknowledged the coincidence. Understood, sir. How can I assist the investigation? David Chen opened his tablet. Let's start with your arrival at Fort Carson. Walk me through your first interaction with Major Brennan. Sarah Chun recounted the ready room introduction in precise detail, her description matching Rodriguez's documentation almost word for word. The condescending nickname, the public questioning of her capabilities, the smirking dismissal. She described it without emotion, as if reporting weather conditions rather than personal harassment. How did that make you feel? David Chen asked. Sarah Chun paused before answering. It told me what kind of commander I was dealing with. Someone who measures authority by how much he can diminish others. Someone who confuses rank with competence. She met David Chen's eyes directly. It didn't surprise me, if that's what you're asking. I've encountered his type before. The mountain rescue mission came next in the chronology. Sarah Chun described the impossible parameters, Morrison's uncomfortable presence as evaluation writer, the perfect execution that should have ended any questions about her capabilities. Then the grounding order that appeared 6 hours later. Did Major Brennan provide any written justification for grounding you? David Chen asked. No, sir. Just a flag in the operations system preventing flight assignments. No specific charges, no incident report, no opportunity for response. Sarah Chen's tone remained neutral, but David Chun heard the underlying anger. It's a tactic designed to damage reputation without providing grounds for formal appeal. David Chun made extensive notes. You seem very familiar with these tactics. Sarah Chen's expression suggested she was choosing her words carefully. I've studied leadership failures extensively. both what works and what doesn't. Major Brennan represents a textbook case of toxic leadership, public humiliation, manufactured deficiencies, obstruction through administrative mechanisms. David Chun moved to the sensitive question he'd been building toward. Captain Chun, your service record has significant classified sections. Gaps in your duty assignments that require special operations clearances to access. You watch her reaction carefully. Can you tell me anything about those assignments? Sarah Chun remained still, her face revealing nothing. Not without proper clearances, sir. Those portions of my record are classified for operational security reasons. I'm in the process of obtaining those clearances, David Chun explained. But it would help to understand generally what kind of experience you bring to this assignment. The kind of experience that might explain why you handled Major Brennan's harassment with such composure. Sarah Chun considered this for a long moment. Generally speaking, sir, I've operated in environments where mistakes had immediate and lethal consequences, where leadership failures resulted in people dying, where professional competence wasn't optional. She paused. Major Brennan's campaign against me registers as an annoyance compared to genuine threats I've faced. David Chun processed this carefully worded response. When do you expect your clearances to come through? They should arrive within 48 hours. I made some calls last night to expedite the process. Who did you call? Sarah Chen's slight smile suggested she'd anticipated this question. People who need to know that my classified background may become relevant to an investigation. People who can authorize limited disclosure for official purposes. She didn't elaborate further, and David Chun didn't push. The interview concluded an hour later. David Chun moved on to Morrison, who corroborated every detail of Sarah Chen's account and added his own observations about Brennan's pattern of behavior. Morrison described the pressure to falsify his evaluation report, the threats to his career when he refused, the text message intimidation. I should have come forward sooner, Morrison admitted. After Park transferred, after Lynn requested reassignment. I saw what was happening, and I did nothing because I was afraid of retaliation. He looked directly at David Chun. That makes me part of the problem. Your statement now is what matters, David Chun replied. Your evaluation documentation is crucial evidence. Without your refusal to falsify that report, we'd have less concrete proof of Brennan's misconduct. Rodriguez came next, bringing 3 years of documented observations and the complete files from Park, Lynn, and Gomez. She walked David Chun through the pattern with prosecutorial precision, showing how each victim experienced identical escalation. Condescension, impossible assignments, manufacture violations, administrative harassment, until transfer became the only viable option. David Chun spent hours reviewing the digital evidence. Park's screenshots showed text messages where Brennan questioned women's place in military aviation. Lynn's saved emails contained performance counseling for infractions so minor they wouldn't normally warrant documentation. Gomez's formal complaint described physical intimidation and retaliation that the battalion equal opportunity investigation had somehow found unsubstantiated. The afternoon brought interviews with 4 other pilots who'd witnessed various incidents. Their testimonies built a comprehensive picture of a commander who uses authority as a weapon against female subordinates while maintaining professional relationships with male pilots. By 1700 hours, David Chun had compiled enough evidence to support formal charges. He drafted his preliminary findings and took them to Colonel Martinez. Martinez read the report in silence, her expression growing colder with each page. This is even worse than the initial documentation suggested. She looked up. What about Captain Chen's classified record? Clearances arrive tomorrow. Her previous commander at Special Operations Command is Major General Patricia Hammond, who apparently ran interference to get the clearances expedited. Martinez's eyebrows rose. A 2-star general is involved? According to my contact at SOCOM, General Hammond commanded Captain Chun during her special operations assignments. When Hammond learned Chun was being investigated as part of a harassment case, she personally authorized record disclosure and offered to provide testimony if needed. Martinez leaned back in her chair. So Brennan's been harassing someone who's personally known to a general officer. Someone whose classified background apparently warrants that level of protection. She shook her head. He really did pick the wrong target. The evidence stands regardless of Chen's background, David Chun pointed out. Even if she were a brand new lieutenant with zero experience, Brennan's conduct would still be unacceptable. Agreed. But I want to know what's in that classified file. If Chun has the kind of background that puts generals on speed dial, it adds context to why she handled this situation the way she did. Martinez pulled up her calendar. How soon can you complete the investigation? Another 72 hours for remaining witness interviews and document review. Then I can provide final findings and recommended actions. Make it 48, Martinez ordered. I don't want Brennan sitting in administrative restriction long enough to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. We move fast on this. David Chin nodded and departed to continue his work. He spent the evening interviewing base personnel who'd observed Brennan's behavior in various contexts. Maintenance crews, administrative staff, junior enlisted soldiers. The picture that emerged was of a commander who treated subordinates as instruments for his ego rather than people deserving respect. Meanwhile, Rodriguez met with Sarah Chun in the latter's quarters to provide an update. The investigation is moving fast. LTC Chun has interviewed everyone relevant. Your classified record clearances arrive tomorrow. Sarah Chun sat on her bunk, cleaning her service pistol with practiced efficiency. What's the timeline for resolution? Days. Martinez wants this wrapped up before Brennan can cause more damage. Rodriguez watched Chin's methodical weapons maintenance. You're very calm about all this. Sarah Chun looked up, her expression unreadable. I've been through worse investigations in worse places. This one at least has competent people running it and a commander who wants the truth. She reassembled the pistol in seconds. The question was never whether the system would work. The question was how long it would take. And now we're in the end game, Sarah Chin replied. Brennan doesn't know it yet, but his career ended the moment Martinez got involved. Everything from here is just documentation and formal process. Rodriguez studied her carefully. You really have done this before, haven't you? Not the harassment specifically, but the waiting, the patience, letting the system work while knowing exactly how it will end. Sarah Chun holstered the pistol and stood. Some battles you win by being better at the actual fight. Others you win by being better at the aftermath, at the investigation, at the institutional response. She walked to the window, overlooking the darkening flight line. Major Brennan is good at harassment and intimidation, but I'm better at surviving them and documenting them and ensuring accountability. That's a skill set he doesn't have. Tomorrow brings the classified file, Rodriguez said. What's in it? Proof that I've faced actual threats and survived them. Proof that Brennan's little campaign was never going to break me, because I've been broken and rebuilt in places that make Fort Carson look like summer camp. Sarah Chun turned from the window. And proof that the woman he's been calling Cupcake earned that nickname the hard way, by being exactly as soft and harmless as the nickname implies. Her tone made the sarcasm clear. Rodriguez smiled despite the tension. I almost feel sorry for him. Don't, Sarah Chun replied. He earned everything that's coming. The clearances arrived at 0900 via encrypted email from Special Operations Command. Lieutenant Colonel David Chin opened the attachment in his secure workspace and began reading Captain Sarah Chin's complete service record for the first time. The gaps in her official file suddenly made sense. 3 years with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Army's elite helicopter unit that supported the most sensitive missions across multiple theaters. Not just any pilot within that unit, but one of their combat-proven aviators with deployment history to Afghanistan and undisclosed locations throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. David Chin scrolled through the commendations. Air Medal with Valor, 3 awards. Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor Device, and 2 Silver Stars, the nation's 3rd highest decoration for combat heroism. He read the citations carefully, his understanding of Sarah Chun transforming with each paragraph. First Silver Star, Captain Chun flew her MH-47 Chinook into a valley in Helmand Province, where a 12-man Special Forces team was surrounded by enemy fighters. Under heavy fire that damaged her aircraft's hydraulics and shattered her windscreen, she maintained position long enough for the team to extract. Her co-pilot was wounded by ground fire. Chun flew the crippled aircraft 40 miles back to base with failing systems, saving all 14 lives aboard. Second Silver Star, when her aircraft took fire during a classified mission and her co-pilot was killed, Chun continued the insertion alone, delivered her payload of CIA officers into denied territory, extracted wounded personnel under fire, and flew her catastrophically damaged helicopter 60 miles back to friendly territory. The aircraft was deemed unrepairable after landing, its structural integrity so compromised that maintenance crews were surprised it had remained airborne. David Chun set down the tablet and stared at his office wall for a long moment. Major Brennan had been calling a two-time Silver Star recipient Cupcake, a pilot who'd been shot down, who'd lost crew members, who'd flown missions so dangerous they remained classified years later. A woman who'd earned decorations that most soldiers never even witnessed being awarded, let alone receive themselves. He picked up his phone and called Colonel Martinez. "Ma'am, you need to see this. I have Captain Chin's complete service record. It's extraordinary." Martinez arrived in his office 15 minutes later. David Chun handed her the tablet without comment. She read in silence, her expression shifting from interest to astonishment to something approaching anger. 847 combat flight hours, she said quietly. 2 Silver Stars. 3 years with the 160th. She looked up, and Brennan called her Cupcake. Without knowing any of this, David Chun confirmed. Chun kept it completely quiet, didn't wear her decorations, didn't mention her background, tried to handle the harassment through normal channels without using her connections. Why would she do that? Martinez asked. One phone call to General Hammond, and this could have been resolved in hours. David Chun had been wondering the same thing. I think she wanted to prove the system works, that a female pilot shouldn't need special operations credentials and general officer endorsements to be treated with basic professional respect. She wanted to be judged on her performance here, not her classified background. Martinez handed back the tablet. Well, her performance here has been flawless. Perfect flight execution, professional demeanor under harassment, patience with the institutional response. She walked to the window, and Brennan grounded her for safety violations after she flew a mission that would have defeated half my brigade. David Chun pulled up the investigation timeline on his computer. I have enough evidence to recommend formal charges. Article 92 for dereliction of duty in supervising subordinates. Article 93 for cruelty and maltreatment. Potentially Article 134 for conduct unbecoming. The pattern is irrefutable. Proceed with formal charges, Martinez ordered. I want Brennan and Foster both brought up on articles. Foster's failure to act on multiple complaints constitutes dereliction at minimum. She turned from the window. And I want Captain Chun formally interviewed about whether she wants to participate in the court-martial proceedings. David Chun made notes. What about the other victims? Park, Lin, and Gomez? Contact them. Offer them the opportunity to provide testimony. Their cases strengthen the pattern evidence. Martinez, check her watch. How soon can we complete the investigation and file charges? 24 hours for final documentation. Then we move to Article 32 hearing and court-martial proceedings. Make it happen, Martinez said. She paused at the door. And David? Make sure Captain Chun understands that we're not pursuing this because of her Silver Stars or her connections. We're pursuing it because Major Brennan systematically harassed multiple soldiers and Colonel Foster enabled it. The decorations just provide context for how completely Brennan misjudged his target. Sarah Chun received the request for follow-up interview at 1300 hours. She reported to David Chin's office an hour later, knowing from Rodriguez's updates that her classified file had been reviewed. Captain Chun, David Chin began. I've now seen your complete service record, including your time with the 160th and your decorations. Sarah Chin's expression remained neutral. I assume you have questions. Several. But first, let me say that your service record is extraordinary. Your citations for valor are among the most detailed and compelling I've ever read. David Chun paused, which makes Major Brennan's treatment of you even more egregious than it already was. My service record is irrelevant to the investigation, Sarah Chun replied. Whether I have 2 silver stars or 0, Brennan's conduct was unacceptable. That's the point I've been trying to make. David Chun nodded. I understand. And for the record, Colonel Martinez agrees with you completely. The case against Brennan stands on its own merits. But your background does help explain your composure throughout this situation. You faced genuinely dangerous threats. Sarah Chen's slight smile suggested layers of experiences she couldn't discuss in an unclassified setting. Major Brennan ranks somewhere below mechanical failure and above annoying paperwork on my personal threat assessment scale. The investigation is complete, David Chun informed her. We're filing formal charges against Brennan for cruelty and maltreatment of subordinates and against Foster for dereliction of duty. You'll be called as a witness in the Article 32 proceedings. Are you prepared for that? Yes, sir. Sarah Chen's response came without hesitation. You should know that your decorated service record will likely become part of the trial record. Defense counsel may argue that your background made you better equipped to handle harassment than average soldiers, potentially attempting to minimize Brennan's conduct. Sarah Chen's expression hardened slightly. Let them argue that. It won't change the documented pattern across multiple victims who didn't have my background. It won't change Morrison's testimony about pressure to falsify evaluations. It won't change the administrative obstruction and manufactured violations. She leaned forward, and it will force Brennan to stand in a courtroom and explain to a panel of senior officers why he thought calling a combat veteran Cupcake was appropriate leadership. David Chin appreciated her strategic thinking. You've thought this through. I had a lot of time while grounded, Sarah Chin replied. I knew once the investigation reached my classified record, the trial dynamics would shift. Better to embrace it than resist it. Let the court-martial panel see exactly who Brennan was harassing and let them draw their own conclusions about his judgment. General Hammond called me yesterday, David Chin mentioned. She offered to provide testimony about your character and service record if needed. Appreciated, but unnecessary, Sarah Chun said. The facts speak for themselves. I prefer to keep this focused on Brennan's pattern of behavior rather than my credentials. David Chun closed his tablet. Final question. Why didn't you use your connections earlier? One call to Hammond, and this could have been resolved weeks ago. Sarah Chun stood and walked to the window overlooking the brigade area. Because using connections to solve problems creates a system where only connected people get justice. She turned back to face him. I'm not the first woman Brennan harassed, and I won't be the last person to face toxic leadership somewhere in the Army. If the only way to stop people like him is through special operations backgrounds and 2-star generals on speed dial, then we haven't actually fixed anything. But the system did work eventually, David Chin pointed out. Brigade Command investigated thoroughly. Justice is being served. After 3 victims were driven out and a 4th was grounded unjustly, Sarah Chin replied. The system worked, but it worked slowly and incompletely until someone with my background forced attention to the issue. She moved toward the door. That's not good enough, sir. We need a system that protects the first victim, not just the one with classified credentials. David Chun watched her leave, impressed by both her tactical patience and her principled stance. She could have resolved this situation immediately through her connections, but chose instead to trust institutional processes, accepting personal cost to prove those processes could function correctly. He returned to his computer and began drafting the formal charge sheets. Article 92 against Foster for willful dereliction of duty in failing to investigate multiple complaints. Article 93 against Brennan for cruelty and maltreatment of 4 separate subordinates over 18 months. Article 134 against both for conduct unbecoming officers through their systematic harassment and obstruction. The charges will be filed tomorrow. The Article 32 hearing would follow within 2 weeks. And Major Derek Brennan would stand before a court-martial panel to explain why he'd spent 18 months systematically harassing female pilots, culminating in his treatment of a decorated combat veteran he'd dismissed as Cupcake. David Chun suspected the panel's response to that explanation would be exactly what Brennan deserved: complete and total career destruction. Major Derek Brennan learned about Morrison's statement at 0700 when his defense counsel forwarded the preliminary evidence packet. He sat in his quarters, reading through the charges with growing disbelief that morphed into cold fury. Article 93 for cruelty and maltreatment. Article 134 for conduct unbecoming. Multiple victims named. Documentary evidence attached. He called Morrison immediately, not caring that it violated his administrative restriction. The phone rang 4 times before Morrison answered. "You gave a statement against me," Brennan said without preamble. "After everything I've done for your career, you stabbed me in the back." Morrison's voice came through tired but firm. "I told the truth about what I witnessed. That's my obligation as an officer." "Your obligation is loyalty to your chain of command," Brennan snapped. "I could have ended your career with one bad evaluation. Instead, I mentored you, gave you opportunities, treated you like a son. This is how you repay that." "You order me to falsify an evaluation report," Morrison replied. "When I refused, you threatened me. That's not mentorship, Major. That's corruption." The call ended abruptly. Brennan threw his phone across the room, then immediately retrieved it to call Colonel Foster. The battalion commander answered on the first ring, his voice strained. "Derek, you can't be calling me. I'm suspended pending investigation outcome. Any communication between us looks like coordination or obstruction." "Richard, listen to me," Brennan pressed. "This entire situation is manufactured. Chun is playing the victim card to cover her inadequate performance. The other women who transferred were weak pilots who couldn't handle operational demands. This investigation is political correctness run amok, and you know it." Foster's long silence suggested he was choosing words carefully. "The evidence against both of us is substantial. Multiple witnesses, documentary proof, pattern across 3 years. My lawyer says I should cooperate fully and accept whatever administrative punishment they offer." "You're going to roll over?" Brennan's voice rose. "We've known each other 20 years. You're going to believe some agenda-driven investigation over your own friend?" "I'm going to believe documentary evidence and witness testimony from my own officers," Foster replied quietly. "I should have acted when Parker first brought this to me. I should have investigated when the second pilot transferred. I didn't, and now I'm facing dereliction charges." He paused. "Derek, you need to accept that this is over. Hire a good lawyer, take whatever deal they offer, and move on." The call ended. Brennan sat in his quarters staring at the charges, his mind racing through options that narrowed with each passing minute. His career was imploding, and the woman he'd dismissed as inadequate was somehow at the center of it, protected by an investigation that seemed determined to destroy him. He pulled up Chin's official file on his computer, studying the sparse entries and classification markers he'd ignored before. The gaps in her service history suddenly seemed significant. The vague references to training assignments and special operations clearances. He'd assumed she was another mediocre pilot gaming the system. Now he wondered what those classified sections actually contained. By mid-morning, Brennan made a decision that would prove catastrophic. He would confront Chun directly, explain that this investigation was ruining both their careers, convince her to withdraw her cooperation. It violated his administrative restriction, but he was already facing charges. One more violation wouldn't matter if he could resolve the underlying problem. He found Chun in the hangar at 1100 hours, reviewing maintenance logs for aircraft she wasn't clear to fly. She looked up as he approached, her expression neutral but alert. "Captain Chun, we need to talk," Brennan began. "This investigation has gotten out of hand. I think if we sit down reasonably, we can resolve our differences without destroying both our careers." Chun set down the tablet slowly. "Major Brennan, you're under administrative restriction. You're not supposed to have contact with me. I'm trying to help both of us," Brennan insisted, stepping closer. "You're new here. You don't understand how these investigations work. They'll drag both of us through months of legal proceedings, damage both our reputations. And for what? Because of some misunderstandings that got blown out of proportion? Chen stood, but didn't retreat. There were no misunderstandings, Major. You systematically harassed me from day one. You called me condescending names, assigned impossible missions hoping I'd fail, grounded me on false charges when I succeeded. Those aren't misunderstandings. Those are documented actions with multiple witnesses. You're being dramatic, Brennan said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he'd used in the ready room. I was tough on you because that's what good commanders do. They push their people to excel. If you couldn't handle the pressure, that's not harassment. That's a performance issue on your part. Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. I completed every mission you assigned, including the mountain rescue that you designed to make me fail. Your own deputy wrote that my performance was exceptional. Then you grounded me 6 hours later. She took a step forward, closing the distance Brennan had created. That's not tough leadership, Major. That's retaliation for not failing when you expected me to. Brennan felt his carefully rehearsed approach slipping away. Listen, Cupcake, he started, then caught himself too late. Chen's slight smile held no warmth. You just violated your administrative restriction by contacting me. You attempted to convince me to withdraw cooperation from an official investigation. And you just used the same condescending nickname that's documented throughout multiple witness statements. She pulled out her phone. This entire conversation has been recorded. Brennan's face drained of color. You're bluffing. Rodriguez stepped out from behind a nearby Chinook, her phone also visible and recording. She's not bluffing. Neither am I. Rodriguez's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. You just handed us additional evidence of your complete inability to recognize appropriate boundaries. Brennan looked between the two women, realizing with growing horror that he'd walked directly into a trap. You set me up, he said. No, sir, Chen replied. We documented you violating your restriction, attempting witness intimidation, and using the same harassing language you've been using for 2 weeks. You did that entirely on your own. Parker emerged from the maintenance office, his expression grim. Major Brennan, I'm placing you under direct observation, pending notification to Brigade Legal. You will return to your quarters immediately and remain there until further notice. This incident will be reported within the hour. Brennan wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He'd been outmaneuvered completely, led into a violation so obvious that even his defense counsel wouldn't be able to minimize it. He looked at Chun one more time, searching for some sign of the inadequate pilot he'd assumed she was. She met his gaze with the calm patience of someone who'd survived actual threats. Who are you really? He asked quietly. Someone you should have treated with professional respect from day one, Chen replied. Regardless of who I am, what I've done, or what decorations I've earned. Because that's the baseline standard for leadership, Major. Something you apparently never learned. Brennan left the hangar under Parker's escort, his career now definitively over. The violation would be reported within the hour. His defense counsel would recommend accepting whatever plea agreement the prosecution offered. The court-martial would proceed regardless of his cooperation. Rodriguez turned to Chun after they'd gone. That was risky. What if he'd actually tried to get physical? Chen's slight smile suggested that possibility hadn't concerned her. I've dealt with worse threats in worse places. Brennan's just a bully who forgot that bullies only win when people are afraid of them. She picked up her tablet and returned to the maintenance logs. Besides, I knew you were recording from behind that Chinook, and I knew Parker was monitoring from the office. Brennan walked into a situation where 3 witnesses were documenting his every word. You planned this, Rodriguez realized. I created the opportunity, Chun corrected. Brennan made his own choices. He chose to violate his restriction. He chose to attempt witness intimidation. He chose to use the same language that's gotten him charged with harassment. She looked at Rodriguez directly. All I did was give him enough rope to hang himself with. He did the rest. Within 90 minutes, Lieutenant Colonel David Chun received notification of Brennan's violation. He immediately drafted an addendum to the formal charges, adding witness intimidation and violation of administrative restriction to the existing articles. The violation was so blatant, documented by 3 separate witnesses with audio recordings, that even the most aggressive defense counsel couldn't dispute it. Colonel Martinez read the addendum in her office, shaking her head. He actually confronted her. After being explicitly ordered to maintain no contact, after facing formal charges, he approached the primary victim and tried to convince her to drop the case. While using the same condescending nickname that's central to the harassment charges, David Chen added, and doing it in front of 2 witnesses who were recording the entire interaction. Martinez set down the report. I've seen a lot of poor judgment in my career, but this might be the most spectacular self-destruction I've witnessed. She looked at David Chen. How does this affect our timeline? Accelerates it significantly. The violation gives us grounds to immediately relieve him from any remaining duties and confine him to quarters pending court-martial. We can move directly to Article 32 hearing within the week. Do it, Martinez ordered. And make sure the panel understands that Brennan's inability to follow basic restrictions demonstrates exactly the kind of judgment failure that enabled his harassment campaign in the first place. David Chen departed to finalize the paperwork. Brennan had sealed his own fate through actions so reckless they suggested a complete disconnect from reality. The investigation had been thorough and damning. The new violation made it airtight. The end game was approaching rapidly now, and Major Darrett Brennan had guaranteed his own absolute and irreversible destruction. The Article 32 hearing convened 7 days later in a sterile conference room at brigade headquarters. Major Brennan sat at the defense table with his military counsel, a captain from the Trial Defense Service who'd reviewed the evidence and privately advised accepting a plea agreement. Brennan had refused. The hearing officer, a lieutenant colonel from Division Legal, called the proceedings to order at 0900. The purpose of this hearing is to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed with court-martial on the following charges. Article 93, cruelty and maltreatment of subordinates. Article 134, conduct unbecoming an officer. Article 92, violation of administrative restriction. Major Brennan, you understand these proceedings? Brennan stood. Yes, sir, I understand. The prosecution called Rodriguez as their first witness. She took the oath and settled into the witness chair with the composure of someone who'd prepared thoroughly for this moment. Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez, the prosecutor began, please describe your observations of Major Brennan's treatment of Captain Chen beginning with her arrival at Fort Carson. Rodriguez walked through the timeline methodically. The Ready Room introduction where Brennan called Chen Cupcake in front of the entire squadron. The impossible mountain rescue assignment on Chen's second day. The grounding order that appeared hours after Chen's flawless performance. Each incident documented with dates, times, and witnesses. Did you observe similar patterns with other female pilots? The prosecutor asked. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Park, Captain Lin, and Warrant Officer Gomez all experienced identical treatment. Rodriguez pulled out her tablet and displayed the compiled evidence. Same condescending nicknames, same impossible assignments, same manufactured violations. 3 women driven to request transfers in 18 months. Brennan's defense counsel stood for cross-examination. Chief Rodriguez, isn't it true that Alpha Company has demanding operational requirements? That Major Brennan's high standard applied equally to all pilots regardless of gender? Rodriguez met his gaze directly. Sir, I've been flying for 15 years across 4 duty stations. I know the difference between high standards and targeted harassment. Major Brennan assigned Captain Chen a mission with 60% abort rate on her second day at this base. He assigned it specifically to make her fail publicly. When she succeeded, he grounded her for phantom safety violations. That's not high standards. That's retaliation. The defense counsel pressed further. But Captain Chen was new to this unit. Isn't it reasonable for a commander to closely evaluate new pilots? Closely evaluate? Yes, Rodriguez replied. Publicly humiliate with condescending nicknames? No. Assign missions designed to cause failure? No. Ground-qualified pilots on false charges? Absolutely not. Captain Morrison testified next, describing the pressure to falsify his evaluation of Chen's mountain rescue flight. Brennan told me to write that Captain Chen showed poor judgment and took unnecessary risks. I refused because both statements were objectively false. Her performance was exceptional by any measurable standard. What happened when you refused? The prosecutor asked. He threatened my career, told me I was being influenced by political correctness. When I submitted my honest evaluation, he grounded Captain Chen 6 hours later on charges that appear nowhere in any official incident report. The defense counsel attempted to characterize Morrison as disgruntled, but Morrison's calm testimony and documentary evidence made that argument collapse. Emails, text messages, and the evaluation report itself all corroborated his account completely. Emma Park testified via video conference, describing her 6 months under Brennan's command. He called me princess and sweetheart. He scheduled me for back-to-back flights that violated crew rest regulations. When I complained, my performance ratings dropped despite no actual decline in my flight performance. Park's voice remained steady, but the underlying emotion was clear. I love flying. I love the Army. Major Brennan made both unbearable until transfer seemed like the only option to preserve my sanity and career. Jessica Lynn followed with similar testimony, adding her documentation of text messages where Brennan had explicitly stated that women lacked the temperament for combat aviation. The messages appeared on the conference room display, their contents undeniable and damning. The prosecution built their case methodically over 6 hours, each witness adding another layer to the pattern. By 1500 hours, they'd established systematic harassment across 4 victims spanning 3 years. Then they called their final witness. Captain Sarah Chun took the oath and sat in the witness chair. The hearing officer studied her with obvious curiosity, having read the classified portions of her file that morning. Captain Chun, the prosecutor began, please describe Major Brennan's conduct toward you from your arrival at Fort Carson. Chun recounted each incident in precise detail, her tone professional and her facts irrefutable. The condescending nickname used repeatedly in front of subordinates. The evaluation rider on her first flight. The impossible mountain rescue assignment. The grounding on false charges. Each statement supported by documentary evidence and witness corroboration. How did this treatment affect your service? The prosecutor asked. It demonstrated a commander who uses rank as a weapon rather than a tool for leadership, Chen replied. It showed systematic bias against female pilots regardless of their qualifications or performance. She paused, and it revealed institutional failures that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked across multiple victims. The defense counsel approached for cross-examination with visible reluctance. Captain Chun, your service record shows classified special operations assignments. Isn't it true that your background gave you unusual resilience to Major Brennan's management style? My background is irrelevant to whether his conduct was appropriate, Chen replied. A commander who harasses subordinates is wrong regardless of whether those subordinates have combat experience or none. The standard for professional conduct doesn't change based on the victim's ability to endure abuse. But you did endure it, the defense counsel pressed. You maintained professional composure throughout. Doesn't that suggest Major Brennan's conduct was within acceptable bounds of tough leadership? Chen's expression remained neutral, but her words carried steel. I maintained composure because I've been shot at by people trying to kill me. I've lost crew members to enemy fire. I've flown damaged aircraft through hostile territory while bleeding from shrapnel wounds. She leaned forward slightly. Major Brennan calling me Cupcake doesn't compare to actual danger, but that doesn't make his conduct acceptable. It just means I had the experience to recognize him as a minor threat rather than a major one. The defense counsel attempted another angle. Your classified record shows 2 silver stars for valor. You're clearly an exceptional pilot. Isn't it possible that Major Brennan simply didn't recognize your capabilities based on your official file? Then he should have evaluated my performance objectively rather than assuming incompetence based on my gender, Chen replied. I demonstrated exceptional capability on every flight I was assigned. His response was to ground me on false charges. That's not a recognition problem. That's a judgment problem. The hearing officer intervened. Captain Chun, for the record, can you confirm that Major Brennan had no access to your classified assignments or decorations during the period in question? Correct, sir. Chun confirmed. My special operations background and combat decorations were classified. Major Brennan had access only to my basic flight qualifications and duty history. Nothing in that official record justified his treatment of me. The hearing officer made notes. So from Major Brennan's perspective, you appeared to be a standard captain with routine qualifications? Yes, sir. Which makes his harassment even more indefensible. If he treated me this way without knowing my background, it means he treats all female pilots this way based solely on gender. The testimony concluded. The hearing officer called a recess to review the evidence. Brennan sat at the defense table, his face pale as he finally grasped the magnitude of his miscalculation. The woman he dismissed as inadequate had 2 silver stars. The pilot he'd called Cupcake had flown missions that made his entire career look trivial by comparison. The captain he'd tried to drive out had the composure and patience to let him destroy himself through documented violations. The hearing officer returned after 30 minutes. Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient grounds to proceed with court-martial on all charges. The pattern of harassment is undeniable, documented across multiple victims with extensive witness corroboration. Major Brennan's violation of administrative restriction to confront the primary witness demonstrates continued poor judgment even while facing formal charges. He looked directly at Brennan. Trial date will be set within 60 days. You are strongly advised to consult with your defense counsel about plea options. Brennan's lawyer leaned close and whispered urgently. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The panel will see your violation of restriction as proof of exactly the kind of judgment failure the harassment charges describe. We need to negotiate a deal that avoids court-martial and minimizes career damage. What kind of deal? Brennan asked quietly. Letter of reprimand, reduction in rank, early retirement with reduced pension, the lawyer replied. It's not great, but it's better than court-martial conviction, which would mean dismissal from service and potential loss of all benefits. Brennan looked across the room at Chun, who was speaking quietly with Rodriguez and Morrison. The 3 of them appeared calm and professional, already discussing their next flight assignments, as if this hearing were merely a minor administrative task rather than the destruction of his career. He'd underestimated her completely, assumed inadequacy based on gender, dismissed her capabilities without evaluation, used his rank to harass rather than lead. And now he was facing the consequences while she returned to flying, and he negotiated the terms of his career's end. I'll take the deal, Brennan said finally. His voice sounded hollow, even to himself. The lawyer nodded and departed to begin negotiations. Brennan remained at the defense table, alone with the wreckage of his career and the belated recognition that the woman he'd called Cupcake had been the most dangerous person he'd ever underestimated. The notification came through official channels 3 days after the Article 32 hearing. Major Derek Brennan had accepted a plea agreement, reduction in rank to captain, general letter of reprimand and permanent file, immediate relief from all command duties, and mandatory retirement within 90 days. The agreement avoided court-martial but guaranteed his career ended in documented disgrace. Colonel Foster received his own administrative outcome the same morning. Relief from battalion command, formal letter of reprimand for dereliction of duty in failing to investigate multiple harassment complaints, and denial of promotion to full colonel. His career effectively ended at the same moment as Brennan's, both men casualties of their own choices and institutional failures they'd enabled. Brigade Commander Colonel Martinez called an all-hands formation for the entire aviation brigade at 1400 hours. 4,000 soldiers assembled on the parade field under clear Colorado skies, the mountain peaks rising sharp and white against the horizon. Martinez took the podium with the bearing of someone who'd spent 30 years earning her authority through competence rather than rank alone. Today, I'm addressing a situation that should never have occurred in my brigade. Over the past 18 months, multiple female pilots in 4th Aviation Battalion were subjected to systematic harassment by their squadron commander. That harassment included condescending nicknames, impossible assignments designed to cause failure, manufactured safety violations, and administrative retaliation when these pilots performed their duties flawlessly. The formation remained silent, thousands of soldiers absorbing words they'd heard rumors about, but never official confirmation. Major Derek Brennan has accepted administrative punishment that ends his career. Colonel Foster, who failed to investigate multiple complaints, has been relieved from command. Martinez paused, letting that sink in. But this situation represents more than two individuals' failures. It represents institutional failures at multiple levels. Equal opportunity investigations that were inadequate. Chain of command processes that dismissed legitimate complaints. A culture that allowed harassment to continue because people were afraid to challenge authority. She looked out across the assembled soldiers. That culture ends today. Effective immediately. Any harassment complaint filed at battalion level will automatically be forwarded to brigade for independent review. Any female soldier who experiences gender-based discrimination will have direct access to Brigade Equal Opportunity Office without going through battalion chain of command. And any leader who retaliates against soldiers for filing complaints will face immediate relief and formal charges. Martinez gestured to her right, where Sarah Chun stood in dress uniform, her silver stars and other decorations clearly visible for the first time since arriving at Fort Carson. The primary victim in this case is Captain Sarah Chun. Some of you know her as the new pilot in Alpha Company. What you may not know is that Captain Chun has 2 silver stars for valor earned during 3 years with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She has 847 combat flight hours. She has saved lives under fire, flown missions most of us can't imagine, and earned decorations that represent the highest standards of courage and skill. For 1,000 pairs of eyes shifted to Chun, who maintained parade rest but met their collective gaze without discomfort. Major Brennan called Captain Chun Cupcake. Martinez continued. He assigned her impossible missions, expecting failure. When she succeeded flawlessly, he grounded her on false charges. He did this without knowing her background, which means he would have done it to any female pilot regardless of qualifications. Her voice hardened. That conduct is unacceptable. It violates our values. It damages unit cohesion. It drives talented soldiers from service. And it will not be tolerated in this brigade. The formation remained absolutely still. Martinez had their complete attention. Captain Chun could have resolved this situation immediately through her connections at Special Operations Command. She chose instead to trust institutional processes, to document violations, to work through normal channels. Martinez looked directly at Chun. She did that because she believed the system should work for every soldier, not just those with classified backgrounds and general officer endorsements. She was willing to endure harassment to prove that point. Martinez returned her attention to the formation. The system did work eventually, but it worked too slowly and only after multiple victims had already been driven to transfer. That's unacceptable. We must do better. Every leader here, from sergeant to colonel, has an obligation to create environments where soldiers are judged on performance rather than gender, where complaints are investigated thoroughly rather than dismissed, where toxic leadership is confronted immediately rather than enabled. She paused for emphasis. This brigade will be the standard for how the Army treats all soldiers with dignity and respect. We will be the model for accountability when leaders fail. And we will ensure that no soldier ever again feels they must accept harassment because the chain of command won't protect them. Martinez called the formation to attention and dismissed them. Soldiers dispersed across the parade field, conversations erupting in small groups as they processed what they'd heard. The official acknowledgement of institutional failure. The public recognition of Chen's background. The new policies designed to prevent future violations. Rodriguez found Chun near the headquarters building as the formation broke up. That was intense. Martinez didn't hold back. She shouldn't, Chun replied. This situation represents failures at every level. Public acknowledgement is the first step toward fixing those failures. Morrison approached, now formally appointed as Alpha Company commander following Brennan's relief. Captain Chun, I want you to know that I'm implementing immediate changes to squadron culture. Clear standards for professional conduct. Regular climate surveys. Direct reporting channels for any concerns. He looked uncomfortable but determined. I should have acted sooner. I let fear for my own career prevent me from doing what was right. I won't make that mistake again. Your testimony helped establish the pattern, Chin said. That took courage given your position as Brennan's deputy. Less courage than it took for you to endure his campaign while trusting the system to work, Morrison replied. He extended his hand. I'd be honored to have you continue in Alpha Company under my command. If you choose to transfer after everything that happened, I'd understand completely. Chun shook his hand firmly. I'm not transferring. I came here to fly Chinooks at a conventional unit. That's what I intend to do. Sergeant Major Parker joined the group, his weathered face showing satisfaction. Brigade Command Sergeant Major Mitchell just told me the new reporting procedures were personally designed by Colonel Martinez. She spent her entire career dealing with gender bias. This situation made it personal for her. Good, Chin said. Personal investment from senior leaders is what drives institutional change. Parker pulled out his phone and showed Chin a message. Emma Park accepted the offer to return. She'll be here next month. Jessica Lynn is considering it, but wants to see how the culture actually changes before making a decision. Rodriguez checked her own messages. Teresa Gomez says she's happy at her current assignment, but appreciates the vindication. She's recommending Fort Carson to other female warrant officers now that leadership has changed. The group dispersed gradually, each returning to their duties with the understanding that the situation had fundamentally shifted. Brennan was gone. Foster was gone. New policies were in place. The institutional response had finally mobilized completely. Chin returned to the flight line, where Chinook sat ready for afternoon training flights. She ran through her pre-flight checks with the same methodical precision she'd shown since arriving, her hands moving across familiar controls while her mind processed the day's events. The formation had served multiple purposes: public acknowledgement of institutional failures, recognition of victims, announcement of policy changes, and a clear message that harassment would face immediate and severe consequences. Martinez had used the situation to establish new standards for the entire brigade. Rodriguez joined her on the flight line, already in flight gear. We're scheduled for mountain terrain training. Nothing impossible, just standard qualifications with proper safety margins. Chin smiled slightly. What? No 60% abort rate assignments on my schedule today? Rodriguez returned the smile. New commander, new culture. Morrison's first act was reviewing all flight assignments for appropriateness and safety. He found 3 missions that Brennan had scheduled specifically to set pilots up for failure. All canceled. They climbed into the Chinook and began their pre-flight coordination. The aircraft responded smoothly as Chun brought the turbines online, the familiar vibration and sound that had defined her career for over a decade. They lifted off and headed toward the mountains, sunlight glinting off snow-covered peaks. Over the radio, Morrison's voice came through from flight operations. Alpha 1, you are cleared for training Area Bravo. Weather is clear, winds within limits, no restrictions. Fly safe. Alpha 1 copies, Chin replied. The simple professionalism in the exchange represented everything the situation should have been from the beginning. Qualified pilots, appropriate missions, leadership focused on accomplishment rather than harassment. They flew through mountain valleys and practiced approach procedures, Chin demonstrating techniques while Rodriguez asked questions and took notes. The afternoon passed in focused training without drama or manufactured crisis. Just competent aviators doing their jobs under leadership that valued performance over prejudice. As they returned to base in the fading light, Rodriguez spoke over the intercom. You know what's remarkable about today? This is what it should have been like from day one. Professional training, clear communication, mutual respect. All the things that should be baseline normal, but somehow weren't until Brennan was gone. That's the real victory, Chin agreed. Not that Brennan faced consequences, though that matters, but that the system now functions the way it should. That future pilots won't face what we faced. That's worth the temporary harassment. They landed smoothly as sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Chin secured the aircraft and completed her post-flight paperwork, then walked across the flight line toward the ready room where Morrison had scheduled an all-pilots meeting to discuss the new squadron standards. The ordeal was over. The institutional changes were implemented. Justice had been served and new protections established. Everything Chun had endured while trusting the system to work had led to this moment, a squadron finally operating under genuine professional standards rather than toxic leadership. It hadn't been quick and it hadn't been easy, but the system had worked, and that made the temporary cost worthwhile. The formal administrative actions concluded 30 days after the Article 32 hearing. Brennan's reduction to captain became official, his letter of reprimand placed permanently in his restricted file, ensuring no future promotion board would ever consider him for advancement. He departed Fort Carson on a gray October morning with no ceremony, no farewell formation, no recognition for his years of service. Just a silent exit befitting someone whose career ended in documented disgrace. Foster's relief from command was followed by his transfer to a staff position at Forces Command Headquarters, where he would serve out his remaining time before mandatory retirement. His officer evaluation report contained language that guaranteed he would never command soldiers again, his legacy permanently marked by his failure to protect subordinates from systematic harassment. Colonel Martinez implemented the promised policy changes across the brigade with methodical precision. Every battalion now reported harassment complaints directly to Brigade Equal Opportunity Office within 24 hours. A new anonymous reporting system allowed soldiers to flag concerns without fear of retaliation. Quarterly climate surveys assessed leadership effectiveness with specific focus on gender inclusion and professional respect. The changes extended beyond policy. Martinez personally interviewed every female pilot in the brigade, asking about their experiences and observations. What she learned troubled her. Subtle biases that weren't actionable as harassment, but created cumulative disadvantages. Assignment patterns that gave men first choice of complex missions. Evaluation language that described women as competent while men were described as exceptional for identical performance. A culture that tolerated casual dismissiveness toward female aviators, even from leaders who would never engage in overt harassment. She addressed these issues in commander development sessions, bringing in outside experts on gender integration and unconscious bias. Some commanders resisted, arguing that focus on inclusion distracted from combat readiness. Martinez shut down that argument decisively by pointing out that Chin's 2 silver stars proved that inclusion and combat effectiveness were complementary rather than contradictory. Emma Park returned to Fort Carson 6 weeks after Brennan's departure. Chin met her at the battalion headquarters, both women now wearing their full decorations, including Chin's silver stars and Park's bronze star from a previous deployment. "I never thought I'd come back here," Park admitted as they walked toward the ready room. "After what Brennan put me through, I swore I'd never set foot on this base again." "Different base now," Chin replied. "Different leadership, different culture. Morrison's implementing real changes." They entered the ready room, where Morrison had assembled the squadron for Park's reintroduction. He addressed the group with quiet intensity. "Some of you remember Lieutenant Park. She transferred out 8 months ago after experiencing harassment that I witnessed and failed to stop." He looked directly at Park. "I apologize publicly for my inaction. I should have spoken up sooner. I didn't, and that failure enabled Major Brennan to continue harming soldiers under my watch." The room remained silent. Morrison continued, "Lieutenant Park is returning because she believes this squadron has changed, because she believes the leadership failures that drove her away have been addressed. Her willingness to give us another chance is more than we deserve. Our job now is to prove that her faith in institutional change is justified. Park stepped forward. I'm not here for revenge or vindication. I'm here because I love flying and I love the Army. Major Brennan made both unbearable for 6 months. Captain Morrison and the new culture he's building make both possible again. She looked around the room. I'm asking everyone here to help maintain these changes, to call out bias when you see it, to ensure that performance determines assignments rather than assumptions about gender, to create the kind of squadron we all deserve to be part of. The pilots responded with genuine applause, several approaching Park afterward to welcome her back. Chun watched the interaction with satisfaction, recognizing that institutional healing required time and sustained effort, but was achievable when leaders prioritized it. Rodriguez found Chun in the maintenance hangar that evening. Jessica Lynn called today. She's accepting the return offer. We'll be here in 2 months. 3 out of 4 victims returning, Chun observed. That's a powerful statement about cultural change. Rodriguez leaned against a workbench. You know what's remarkable? We're not just fixing what Brennan broke. We're building something better than what existed before he arrived. Morrison told me he's implementing mentorship programs pairing junior female pilots with experienced aviators. Gender-neutral language in all performance evaluations. Transparent assignment processes where everyone can see how missions are distributed. That's how you prevent future Brennans, Chin said. Not just punishing the individual, but fixing the systems that enabled him. The special operations community learned about the situation through informal channels, as most information traveled in that world. Chin received calls from former 160th colleagues expressing support and, in several cases, sharing their own experiences with gender bias in military aviation. One conversation particularly stood out. A lieutenant colonel who'd left active duty after years of subtle discrimination told Chun that seeing institutional accountability gave her hope that the Army was genuinely evolving. General Hammond called on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after Brennan's departure. Sarah, I wanted to check how you're doing. I heard about the brigade formation where your background went public. I'm fine, ma'am, Chun replied. The publicity was uncomfortable but necessary for the institutional message Colonel Martinez wanted to send. Hammond's voice carried both pride and concern. You handled this situation with remarkable patience. Most officers with your credentials would have used their connections immediately. You chose to trust the process even when it was slow and incomplete. The process needed to work for everyone, not just for me, Chun explained. If I'd resolved it through special operations channels, it would have sent the message that only connected people get justice. That's not the Army we need to build. Hammond was silent for a moment. You're right, of course, but cost you personally. Weeks of harassment while waiting for institutional processes to mobilize. That's a high price to pay for principle. Cheaper than the alternative, Chun replied. If the system only works for elite operators with general officer contacts, then 3/4 of soldiers have no protection. Better to endure temporary harassment and prove the system can function correctly. You're a better officer than I was at your age, Hammond said, and probably a better one than I am now. She paused. For what it's worth, your handling of this situation is being discussed at senior levels. You've become an example of how to confront toxic leadership through institutional channels rather than informal connections. I'd rather be known as a good pilot than as an example of harassment response, Chun observed. Hammond's laugh carried through the phone. You're both, and the Army's better for it. She ended the call with an invitation to visit SOCOM headquarters if Chun ever wanted to discuss future assignments, leaving the door open for return special operations if conventional aviation lost its appeal. The weeks passed into months. Morrison's changes took root, transforming squadron culture through consistent reinforcement of professional standards. Park and Lynn integrated smoothly into the flight rotation, their presence reminding everyone of why the changes mattered. The anonymous reporting system received occasional submissions flagging minor issues that were addressed quickly before they could escalate into major problems. Chun flew regular missions, cargo transport to mountain bases, training exercises with ground forces, search and rescue standby rotations. The routine work that defined conventional aviation, so different from special operations but satisfying in its own way. No combate, no classified missões, no lifior de stakes. Just professional pilots doing competent work under leaders who valued performance over politics. Rodriguez accompanied her on most flights, their partnership developing into the kind of crew coordination that made complex missions feel effortless. They developed efficient communication patterns, anticipated each other's actions, and built the mutual trust that defined effective aviation teams. During one mountain training flight, Rodriguez spoke over the intercom. "You ever miss the 160th? The high-intensity missions, the specialized work?" "Sometimes," Chin admitted. "But this has value too. Building healthy culture, demonstrating that conventional units can operate professionally, proving that talent exists everywhere if leadership creates conditions for it to flourish." She adjusted their heading toward a narrow valley. Special operations gets attention and resources. Conventional forces are where most soldiers serve. If I can help improve culture here, that affects more people than anything I did in SOCM. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. That's a remarkably selfless perspective from someone who could be flying the most advanced missions in the most elite unit. Chin smiled slightly. Elite units don't need me as much as conventional units do. SOAR has plenty of exceptional pilots and healthy culture. Alpha Company needed someone willing to endure harassment while trusting institutions to work. She brought the Chinook into a hover above their designated landing zone. Different missions required different skill sets. This one just happened to require patience rather than combat prowess. They landed smoothly and completed their training objectives, then returned to base as afternoon shadows lengthened across the mountains. The flight line bustled with normal activity. Maintenance crews servicing aircraft, pilots reviewing mission plans, commanders coordinating schedules. All the routine functions of a professional aviation unit operating under competent leadership. Chin secured her aircraft and walked toward the ready room for the evening briefing. Morrison had established daily all-hands meetings to maintain communication and reinforce cultural standards. The meetings were brief but effective, ensuring everyone understood current operations and upcoming changes. As she entered the building, Chin reflected on the 3 months since her arrival at Fort Carson. The harassment, the investigation, the institutional response, and the cultural transformation. The ordeal had been unpleasant, but ultimately successful, proving that military justice systems could function correctly when leaders prioritized accountability over protection of toxic individuals. The squadron she now served in bore little resemblance to the one Brennan had commanded. Professional rather than toxic. Merit-based rather than biased. Accountable rather than obstructive. The transformation wasn't complete and would require ongoing effort to maintain, but the foundation was solid. That foundation would protect future pilots from experiencing what Shun, Park, Lin, and Gomez had endured. And that protection represented victory, far more meaningful than Brennan's career destruction. 3 months after the brigade formation, winter settled over Fort Carson with heavy snowfall that blanketed the mountains and testing grounds. Chun stood in Colonel Martinez's office for what the brigade commander called a climate assessment follow-up, though the conversation ranged far beyond simple metrics. "The changes are holding," Martinez said, reviewing survey results on her computer. "Harassment reports are down across the brigade. Anonymous submissions show increased confidence in leadership response. Female retention rates have stabilized after 2 years of decline." She looked at Chin directly. "Your situation created a crisis that forced overdue institutional reforms. The question is whether those reforms survive once the immediate crisis fades from memory." "That depends on whether leaders maintain focus," Chin replied. "Cultural change requires sustained effort over years, not just policy announcements and one-time training." Martinez nodded. "I'm rotating the harassment prevention briefing into quarterly commander development, making climate assessment a formal part of every leader's evaluation, ensuring that future battalion commanders understand that enabling toxic leadership will end their careers as definitively as it ended Foster's. She paused. But institutions have short memories. 5 years from now, someone might decide these policies are bureaucratic overhead rather than essential safeguards. Then the next victim will have documentation and procedures to reference, Chen observed. Each case that's handled correctly makes the next one easier. Each leader who faces accountability makes future leaders more careful. Progress isn't linear, but it does accumulate. Martinez studied Chen with the assessment of someone evaluating future command potential. You've been recommended for early promotion to major. Your performance here, combined with your classified record, makes you exceptionally competitive. The promotion board will likely select you ahead of your peers. Chen absorbed this information without visible reaction. Appreciated, ma'am. Though I'd note that my performance here shouldn't be exceptional. It should be baseline. Any competent officer would have handled harassment through proper channels and trusted institutional processes. Any competent officer with 2 silver stars and 3 years in special operations, Martinez corrected. Most captains would have either used their connections immediately or transferred rather than endure weeks of harassment. Your patience and principle were remarkable, not routine. The conversation shifted to broader aviation issues, then concluded with Martinez's thanks for Chen's role in forcing institutional accountability. Chen departed the headquarters building and walked across the snow-covered parade ground toward the flight line where Rodriguez was coordinating afternoon missions. The squadron had evolved significantly in the 3 months since Morrison took command. Assignment processes were transparent, with mission complexity distributed based on pilot experience and qualifications rather than gender. Performance evaluations used standardized language that described accomplishments objectively. Monthly climate surveys provided anonymous feedback that Morrison reviewed personally and addressed in all-hands meetings. Park had reintegrated smoothly, her skills and confidence returning as she flew missions without manufactured obstacles. Lin would arrive next month to a squadron fundamentally different from the one that had driven her away. The changes weren't perfect and occasional issues arose, but they were addressed quickly rather than ignored or dismissed. Chen found Rodriguez reviewing maintenance schedules in the operations center. Morrison wants you to lead the high-altitude rescue qualification course next month. He's making it a formal training program rather than impossible test used to make people fail. That's appropriate, Chen said. Mountain rescue should be taught systematically with progressive skill development. The old approach of throwing new pilots into extreme conditions just created unnecessary risk. Rodriguez smiled. The old approach was designed by Brennan to make female pilots fail publicly. Morrison's approach is designed to make all pilots succeed safely. She pulled up the course syllabus on her tablet. He wants you to write the training standards. Your mountain flying expertise, combined with your teaching experience, makes you the obvious choice. Chen reviewed the preliminary syllabus, making mental notes about improvements. I'll have a draft by end of week. We should include decision-making scenarios where aborting is the correct choice, not a sign of failure. That alone would fix a major cultural problem. The afternoon brought routine training flights. Chen flew with a new warrant officer who'd just arrived at the squadron, demonstrating techniques while encouraging questions and discussion. The warrant officer flew competently but cautiously, clearly expecting criticism for any imperfection. You're doing fine, Chen assured him over the intercom. Mountain flying requires conservative decision-making. Caution is appropriate for someone learning these skills. The warrant officer relaxed slightly. Previous instructors made it seem like hesitation was weakness. Hesitation is risk assessment, Chen corrected. Recklessness masked as confidence kills pilots. Smart aviators take time to evaluate conditions before committing to difficult approaches. She demonstrated the concept by talking through her own decision process as they approached a narrow landing zone. That's the culture we're building here. Competence through careful evaluation rather than bravado. They completed the training and returned to base as sunset painted the mountains in shades of orange and purple. The warrant officer thanked Chen for the instruction, noting that he'd learned more in 3 hours than in weeks of previous training that had focused on criticism rather than teaching. Chun completed her post-flight paperwork and headed toward the parking lot where her car sat covered in fresh snow. Rodriguez intercepted her near the exit. "General Hammond called the squadron today. She's conducting a review of Special Operations Aviation training and wants your input, specifically about how conventional unit experience informs Special Operations preparation." Chun consider this. When she want to meet? Next month at SOCOM headquarters. 3-day working group with senior aviators from across the force. Rodriguez handed her a printed invitation. "It's optional but strongly encouraged. Your perspective on institutional culture would add value to their doctrine review." "I'll go," Chin decided. Conventional and special operations aviation inform each other. Better integration benefits both communities. The weeks passed quickly. Jessica Lynn arrived and integrated into the flight rotation with the same smooth professionalism Park had shown. The 3 women who'd been driven out by Brennan were now flying together regularly, their presence a constant reminder of why cultural change mattered. Other female pilots noticed and commented favorably on the squadron's transformation. Morrison's leadership continued earning respect through consistent actions rather than empty rhetoric. He addressed issues promptly, communicated transparently, and held everyone to identical standards regardless of gender. His approach wasn't revolutionary, just competent leadership applied consistently. But competence felt revolutionary after 18 months of Brennan's toxic command. Chen received her promotion notification 2 months into the new year. The board had selected her below the zone, meaning ahead of her peers, based on her performance record and strong recommendations from both conventional and special operations commanders. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for March, with Colonel Martinez presiding. The night before the ceremony, Chen sat in her quarters reviewing the past 6 months. The harassment, the investigation, the cultural transformation, and the institutional changes that had emerged from crisis. She thought about Brennan's career ending in disgrace, Foster's relief from command, and the 3 victims who'd returned because they believed the squadron had genuinely changed. She thought about the Warren officer she'd trained who learned that caution was wisdom rather than weakness, about Park's renewed confidence, about Lynn's willingness to give Fort Carson another chance, about Rodriguez's tireless advocacy and Morrison's determined leadership, about Martinez's brigade-wide reforms and commitment to sustained cultural improvement. The ordeal had been unpleasant but productive. One situation had exposed and corrected institutional failures that had existed for years. Multiple soldiers would benefit from the changes even though they'd never know the specific crisis that prompted them. That benefit extended far beyond personal vindication or career advancement. The promotion ceremony proceeded with military precision. Martinez pinned the major's rank on Chen's uniform while the assembled squadron applauded. In her brief remarks, Martinez noted that Chen's promotion reflected exceptional performance under challenging circumstances and strong potential for future leadership. After the ceremony, several pilots approached Chun with congratulations. The new Warren officer she'd trained thanked her again for teaching him that competent pilots assess risk rather than ignore it. Park told her that returning to Fort Carson had been the right choice because the squadron now reflected the Army's best values rather than its worst failures. Rodriguez pulled Chin aside as the reception concluded. "You know what this means? Your promotion, combined with your background and your role in fixing this situation, you're probably going to command a company in a few years, maybe a battalion after that. Your influence will extend well beyond Alpha Company. If that happens, I'll remember these lessons," Chen replied. That cultural change requires sustained leadership commitment. That accountability must apply equally regardless of rank or connections. That institutional processes work when leaders prioritize them. She looked around the ready room, where pilots mingled in conversations that would have been impossible under Brennan's command. And that creating healthy culture isn't optional or secondary to mission accomplishment. It's essential to mission accomplishment. The reception ended, and soldiers dispersed to their evening routines. Chun walked across the flight line one more time, watching maintenance crews prepare aircraft for tomorrow's missions. The base looked no different than it had 6 months ago. Same buildings, same helicopters, same Colorado mountains rising against the darkening sky. But everything had changed. The culture, the leadership, the institutional protections. The transformation from toxic to healthy, from obstructive to accountable, from biased to merit-based. Changes that would outlast any individual's assignment and benefit soldiers who'd never know the crisis that prompted the reforms. Chen thought about online viewers who might hear this story, people who'd faced dismissal based on assumptions about what they could or couldn't do. Some of you watching have probably encountered leaders who underestimated you because of gender or background or appearance. Maybe you're dealing with that right now, wondering if speaking up will help or just make things worse. The truth was complicated. Speaking up required courage because institutional processes were imperfect and outcomes uncertain. But silence guaranteed that toxic leaders continued harming people while systems that should protect soldiers remained dormant and unused. The choice between imperfect action and certain inaction wasn't really a choice at all for anyone committed to making institutions work correctly. Chun had chosen action, documentation, and institutional process over connections and shortcuts. That choice had cost her temporary harassment, but produced permanent improvements. The calculations seemed sound in retrospect, though she acknowledged the privilege of having credentials and connections to fall back on if institutional processes had completely failed. Not everyone had that safety net, which meant institutional reforms mattered even more for average soldiers than for special operations veterans. The system had to work reliably for everyone, not just those with generals on speed dial. She reached her car and drove toward the base exit, passing the headquarters building where lights still burned in Martinez's office. The brigade commander would maintain pressure on cultural issues because she understood that progress required sustained effort. Morrison would continue implementing squadron-level improvements because he'd learned from his failure to act sooner. Park and Lin would fly missions competently because leadership finally valued performance over prejudice. And somewhere, soldiers who'd never meet Chun would benefit from harassment policies and reporting procedures that existed because one situation had forced institutional accountability. That distributed benefit represented the real victory, far more significant than Brennan's career destruction or Chen's personal vindication. The base gates disappeared in her rearview mirror as she drove toward her off-base apartment. Tomorrow would bring more routine flights, more training, more of the professional aviation work that defined conventional units. No drama, no crises, no manufactured conflicts. Just competent soldiers doing their jobs under leaders who enabled rather than obstructed mission accomplishment. That normalcy, hard-won and carefully maintained, was worth every uncomfortable moment of the preceding months. Because normal shouldn't be extraordinary. Professional treatment shouldn't require special operations credentials. And basic respect shouldn't depend on having generals as advocates. The system could work for everyone. Chun had proved that through patience and principle. Now the challenge was ensuring those lessons survived beyond the immediate crisis, embedded in policies and culture and leadership development, until they became simply how things were done rather than exceptional responses to extraordinary situations. The mountains faded into winter darkness behind her. Ahead lay continued service, future challenges, and the ongoing work of making military institutions live up to their stated values. The work was never finished, but it could be advanced one situation at a time, one leader held accountable, one cultural reform implemented and maintained. Chun was ready for that work. She'd been ready since the moment Brennan called her Cupcake and assumed incompetence based on gender. His career had ended, but the mission continued, broader and more important than any individual case. The mission of building institutions worthy of the soldiers who served in them.